Harlan Cutter didn't knock. He never knocked. He pushed open the door to Cal Decker's ranch house like he already owned it, because in his mind, he already did. He dropped a folded document on the kitchen table without being invited in, without removing his hat, without so much as a glance at the woman standing 3 feet away holding a cast-iron skillet. 30 days, he said, tapping the paper with one thick finger. Then I'm taking the south pasture, and if you can't cover the rest, I'll take it all. Cal's jaw tightened. He didn't move. Cutter finally looked at Marin, looked through her, the way men like him always did, and smiled the kind of smile that wasn't a smile at all. New housekeeper? He asked Cal. Hope she's better at cooking than you are at paying debts. He walked out the same way he walked in, like he owned the air in the room. If you've ever felt invisible in a place you were trying to save, this story is for you. Subscribe to the channel and follow Marin's story all the way to the end, because what this woman does next will stay with you. Hit like, leave a comment with the city and country where you're watching. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. So, the stagecoach from Millhaven didn't stop in Tanner's Creek so much as it collapsed there. A slow, groaning halt at the edge of a town that looked like it had stopped believing in itself some years back. 2 passengers climbed down. A traveling salesman who immediately disappeared into the nearest saloon, and a woman in her mid-30s who stood at the edge of the road and looked at a hand-drawn map that had gotten wet at some point and was barely readable anymore. Marin Voss turned the map sideways, then upside down. Then she folded it and put it in her coat pocket because looking at it longer wasn't going to help. She had a canvas bag over one shoulder. Inside it, 2 changes of clothes, a small tin sewing kit her mother had given her, a pair of worn leather gloves, and $3.40, which was all that remained of the life the Millhaven Savings and Agricultural Bank had decided to take from her 7 months ago, with a letter delivered on a Tuesday morning while she was hanging laundry. She hadn't cried when she read the letter. She hadn't cried when she handed over the house key. She hadn't even cried at the train station when her sister-in-law pressed $2 into her hand and said, "Marin, I'm sorry, I just can't," and then couldn't finish the sentence. She'd cried exactly once, alone in the back of a hired wagon somewhere between Millhaven and the railhead, when she was certain no one could hear her. She gave herself 20 minutes, then she stopped. She was done crying. That was the decision she'd made. The Decker Ranch was listed in the Territorial Employment Circular as seeking a household manager, capable and durable, room and board provided. The word durable had caught her eye. Not pleasant, not refined, durable. Like they were looking for something that could take some weight without breaking. She figured that described her well enough. The walk to the ranch took 40 minutes on a road that was more suggestion than road. By the time she reached the gate, a wooden gate with one hinge doing the work of 2, her shoes had collected enough dust to fill a small jar, and she'd already passed 3 fence posts that had fallen and hadn't been stood back up. She noticed things like that. She always had. Her late husband Thomas used to tease her about it. You could walk through a burning building and stop to note the faulty chimney mortar. Maybe. But that was also why their fence had always stood straight and their roof hadn't leaked. The ranch house itself sat about 200 yards past the gate. It was a solid structure once. She could see that in the bones of it, the way the porch had been built wide and the windows placed to catch afternoon light. But the porch boards were warping badly, 2 window panes were cracked, and the garden alongside the south wall was nothing but dead stalks and volunteer weeds. The whole property had the feel of a man who'd stopped answering the door. She knocked anyway. For a long moment, nothing. Then boots on wood floors, heavy and unhurried, and the door opened. Cal Decker was taller than she'd expected, wide through the shoulders, with the kind of hands that came from actual work rather than the idea of it. He was maybe 38, though something in his face made him read older, a tiredness that didn't come from lack of sleep. His shirt was clean, but his eyes were the eyes of someone who hadn't quite decided whether the day was worth getting through. He looked at her bag. He looked at her shoes. He looked at her face for about 2 seconds in a way that wasn't unkind, but wasn't warm either. "You're the woman from the circular," he said. It wasn't a question. "Marin Voss," she said. "Yes." He leaned against the doorframe. "Can you cook?" "Well enough." "Can you keep accounts?" She hadn't expected that. "I can." He was quiet a moment. Then, almost like an afterthought, "Can you sew?" She thought of the tin kit in her bag, the tiny scissors, the needles wrapped in cloth to keep them from rusting. "That's actually what I'm best at," she said. Something crossed his face, not relief exactly, but the closest thing to it she'd see from him for a while. He stepped back from the door. "I've got a contract drawn up by the county clerk," he said. "Legal arrangement. You'd be listed as my wife for tax and property purposes. You'd have your own room. I'm not. That's not what this is." "I understand," she said. "It can be dissolved. 60 days notice, either party." "I understand that too." He nodded once and walked back inside, leaving the door open. She took that as an invitation and followed him in. The inside of the house told the same story as the outside, just louder. The kitchen table had a stack of papers on one end that had clearly been growing for some time. Receipts, delivery notices, something that might have been a bank statement folded in thirds. A coffee cup sat on the counter with old coffee still in it. There was a chair near the window with a cushion that had been mended once, carefully, with a different color thread than the original fabric, and Marin found herself looking at that mend and wondering who had made it. Cal set a single-page document on the table and smoothed it with his palm. "You can read it over," he said. She read it, all of it, including the part at the bottom about property rights and the part in the middle about dissolution terms. Cal stood by the window and didn't hover, which she appreciated. "There's a line here about household expenses," she said. "It says I'm authorized to make purchases under $2 without prior approval. What about above $2? He turned from the window. "You'd ask me. And if you're out on the range and something needs fixing that costs $3? He looked at her like he was recalculating something. "Then use your judgment," he said. "And tell me when I get back." She signed it. Ichi said. He showed her the room that afternoon. It was small, with a window facing east and a bed frame that needed one leg shimmed with a piece of wood, which she noticed immediately and said nothing about yet. There was a chest of drawers, a hook on the back of the door, and a braided rug that had been good once. "There's no lock," he said, almost apologetically, which was the most personal thing he'd said to her so far. "I'll be fine," she said. He left her to settle in. She sat on the edge of the bed for a while and just breathed. The mattress was lumpy. The pillow smelled like cedar, which meant someone had stored it properly at some point. Outside the window, she could see a stretch of field that looked like it hadn't been rotated in too long. Beyond that, fence line. Beyond that, the kind of flat land that went on until it didn't. This is what you have, she told herself. Make something of it. She started in the kitchen because that was where the day started, and she needed a place to anchor herself. The stove was functional. She got a fire going in 20 minutes and had water heating while she assessed the pantry. Flour, salt, lard, dried beans, some cornmeal, a tin of molasses that was still good. No eggs. She found the root of that problem when she went to the coop out back and discovered that the latch on the coop door had been broken long enough for a fox to learn the schedule. She fixed the latch with a piece of wire she found in the barn and a rock from the yard. Not elegant, but it would hold. Cal came in for the noon meal looking like he'd already had a difficult morning and hadn't expected the smell of fresh cornbread to greet him. He sat down and ate without saying much. She sat across from him with her own plate and ate the same. "Latch on the chicken coop was broken," she said. He stopped chewing. "I know. I fixed it." He looked at her. "With what?" "Wire and a rock." He was quiet for a moment. "I meant to get around to that." "You've got a lot to get around to," she said, and she said it without any edge in her voice, just as a statement of fact, because it was. He looked at his plate. "Yeah," he said. "I know that too." After the meal, she washed up and went to find the ledger. It took her 20 minutes of looking. It was under a stack of shipping receipts and what turned out to be 3 unopened letters from a land office. But she found it. A cloth-bound ledger with a brass clasp that had gone slightly green. She took it to the kitchen table, made herself a cup of coffee, and opened it. What she found inside made her set down the cup. The ledger went back 2 years. The first year of entries was in a different hand, smaller, more precise, with notes in the margins about planting dates and livestock prices. The second year, the handwriting changed, became larger, more careless, like someone writing in a hurry or writing when they didn't really want to be writing at all. The margins went empty. She didn't ask who had kept the first year's accounts. She already understood. But the numbers themselves, that was something else. By the time Cal came back inside at dusk, she had been through every page twice and had made her own notes on a separate piece of paper she'd found in the kitchen drawer. She had them arranged by type, what she was sure of, what she suspected, and what she needed to ask him about. "Sit down," she said when he came through the door. He looked at the ledger open on the table and the papers beside it, and he didn't move. "What are you doing with that?" "I'm trying to understand why you're paying Grange and Fulton $11 a month for hay delivery when Amos Pruitt down the road is charging $6 for the same weight." Cal blinked. "Who told you about Amos Pruitt?" "The delivery receipt on the bottom of your paper pile. Pruitt made a delivery 18 months ago. One time, then it stopped." She looked at him. "Grange and Fulton is where you went back to after that?" "Grange and Fulton has a contract." "Do you have a copy of it?" He hesitated. Then he walked to the shelf near the fireplace and pulled out a folder and dropped it on the table. She opened it, found the contract, and read it in under 2 minutes. "This contract expired 8 months ago," she said. He went very still. "You've been paying contracted rates on an expired contract," she said, "which means you've been paying $11 a month out of habit, not obligation. And Grange and Fulton did not correct this. He stopped. Started again. "Eleanor handled the accounts." Marin nodded. She looked back at the ledger, not at him, because she understood that what he'd just said had cost him something, and he needed a moment without anyone looking at him. "There are also 2 payments here in March, both to the same supplier, same week, same amount. One of them is probably a mistake. Could be the supplier's, could be yours. But you need to know which." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down heavily. "How did you—" "I kept accounts for my husband's dry goods store for 9 years, she said, "before the bank took it." He looked at her then. Something shifted in his face. "I didn't know that." "You didn't ask," she said. Not unkindly, just true. He rubbed the back of his neck. "How bad is it?" "It's not good," she said honestly, "but it's not unfixable. Most of it is money you shouldn't have spent, not money you lost to bad decisions. There's a difference. You can recover from carelessness faster than you can recover from bad judgment." She paused. "You'll need to write to Grange and Fulton and renegotiate, and you'll need to write out to Pruitt and see if he's still taking delivery contracts." "In the middle of cattle season." "Yes," she said. "In the middle of cattle season." He looked at her like he wasn't sure whether to be frustrated or grateful and had landed somewhere uncomfortably between the two. "You've been here one day," he said. "I know," she said. "There's more, but that can wait until tomorrow." Bad. The porch was the first physical thing she fixed. She found 2 good planks in the barn that had been cut for some other purpose and never used, sitting behind a broken wagon wheel and a coil of old rope. She spent a morning pulling the worst of the warped porch boards and cutting the barn wood to size. Her hands blistered by the second nail. She hadn't done this kind of work in a while, but she didn't stop. Cal came around the corner of the house mid-morning and stopped dead. "What are you—" He stared at the pulled boards, at the nails in her hand, at the hammer. "You know how to do that?" "My father built houses," she said. "I was the only child he had for the first 12 years. He didn't have the patience to treat me like I couldn't learn things." Cal stood there for a moment. "I was going to get around to—" "You keep saying that," she said. He closed his mouth. "I'm not criticizing you," she said, pulling another nail. "I'm just fixing the porch." He watched her for a moment. Then, without saying anything, he went to the barn and came back with his own hammer and worked the other side of the porch without being asked. They worked in near silence for 2 hours. It wasn't comfortable silence exactly, not yet. It was more like the silence of 2 people who haven't decided what to say to each other, but have found a task that doesn't require words. When they finished, the porch was solid underfoot for the first time in who knew how long. Cal stood on it and bounced his weight experimentally. "Doesn't creak," he said, sounding almost surprised. "Not yet," she said. "Give it a winter." He almost smiled. It didn't quite get there, but it was close. She had been at the ranch 9 days when Harlan Cutter showed up. She'd heard the name already. from the woman at the general store in town who had sold her thread and buttons and had used the name with the particular tone people reserve for weather they've learned to be afraid of. Cutter's land runs along the south of Decker's, the woman had said, without Marin asking. He's been at Cal for years about that south pasture. She'd said it like she was warning her. Maybe she was. Cutter arrived on a Thursday morning while Cal was out checking fence line on the north side of the property. He came with a man Marin didn't know, younger, quieter, the kind of quiet that was paid for, and he didn't knock. He pushed the door open. Marin was at the kitchen table going through receipts with a cup of coffee at her elbow. She did not stand up. She did not startle. She looked at the door and at the man filling it and at the younger man behind him, and she said very calmly, "Can I help you?" Cutter looked at her the way she'd been looked at by men like him before, assessed and dismissed in the same glance. He was maybe 50, carrying extra weight in the jaw and shoulders, with a coat that cost more than most people in this county made in a month. He dropped a folded document on the table without being invited to. It landed right on top of her receipts. "Where's Decker?" he said. "Not here," she said. "You're welcome to wait on the porch." She paused deliberately. "Or come back another time." He looked around the kitchen, at the organized papers, at the fresh cornbread cooling on the counter, at the curtains she'd rehung 3 days ago after restitching the rod pockets. "New wife?" he said, and the way he said it made the word sound like a small insult. "I'm the household manager," she said, which was technically the truth. He tapped the document on the table. "Make sure he sees that. 30 days, south pasture, unless he wants to work something out." He said that last part in a tone that made work something out sound like an invitation to be robbed slowly rather than quickly. "I'll see that he gets it," she said. Cutter looked at her one more time. Then he left, taking the younger man with him, and he left the door open behind him, which she was fairly sure was deliberate. She got up and closed it. Then she picked up the document and read it. By the time Cal came in for the noon meal, she had read it 3 times, made a page of notes, and had a pot of beans going on the stove, because whatever else was happening, the man needed to eat before he dealt with bad news. She set the bowl in front of him. She set her notes beside it. "Cutter came this morning," she said. She watched his face go from tired to something harder. "What did he say?" "He didn't say much. He left a document." She pushed the folded paper toward him. "Read it, then read my notes." He looked at her over the paper. "You already read it." "I did." "And?" "Read it yourself first," she said. "I don't want to tell you what to think about it before you've had a chance to think about it yourself." He looked at her for a moment, and she could tell he wasn't used to being talked to that way. Not disrespectfully, but like he was capable of forming his own opinion and ought to be given the chance to do it. He opened the document and read it. She watched his expression move through stages, the initial blankness, then a tightening around the eyes, then something that might have been fear if he'd let it be, but he pulled it back into the familiar shape of anger instead. "He's saying I missed a payment in January," he said. "That triggered a default clause." "That's what he's saying," Marin agreed. "I didn't miss a payment in January." "I know. I found the receipt." She slid her notes across the table. The receipt, a carbon copy, faded but legible, was paper-clipped to the top. "You paid on the 14th. The clause says payments are due by the 20th. You were 6 days early." Cal stared at the receipt, then at Cutter's document, then at the receipt again. "Then why is he claiming default?" "Because he's counting on you not having kept the receipt," she said, "or not being able to find it, or just being tired enough to believe him." She watched his face. "How long has he been pressuring you about that pasture?" 3 years, Cal said quietly. "And has he tried this before? Paper claims, default notices?" Cal ran a hand over his face. "Twice. I paid him off both times just to make it stop." Marin nodded slowly. She thought about the woman at the general store and her warning tone. She thought about the duplicate payments in the ledger from March. 2 vendors, one of which she now suspected was not a mistake, but a manufactured obligation. "There's something else," she said. "In the original contract on the pasture," she reached across and turned to the 3rd page of Cutter's document. "He keeps referencing the original terms. Have you got a copy of the original contract?" "Somewhere," Cal said. "Find it tonight," she said. "I want to look at it." He looked at her. Why? What are you thinking? She wasn't ready to say it yet. She needed the document first. She needed to be sure. I'm thinking that Harlan Cutter has been winning for 3 years because you've been fighting him alone, she said. And I'm thinking that might be about to change. Cal set down his spoon. He looked at her, really looked at her, maybe for the first time. The way you look at someone when you're updating your understanding of who they are. You've been here 9 days, he said. I know, she said. 9 days, and you're already… Yes, she said simply. He was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the wind moved through the dry grass, and a horse shifted in the barn, and somewhere down the road a gate banged in the same broken rhythm it had probably been banging for months. The contract's in the desk, he said. Bottom drawer. There's a blue envelope. I'll find it after supper, she said. Finish your beans. He looked at the bowl. He picked up his spoon, and then, like it surprised him a little, he ate. The blue envelope was not in the bottom drawer. It was under the bottom drawer. Fallen behind it, lodged against the back panel of the desk in the way things fall when someone pulls the drawer out too hard and too often. Marin found it by getting down on her knees with a candle and running her hand along the back of the desk cavity, which was how she found most things in this house, by getting low and looking where no one else had bothered to look. She set it on the kitchen table and opened it carefully, because the envelope was old enough that the flap had resealed itself with age, and she didn't want to tear anything. 3 documents inside. The original pasture contract dated 6 years back, a survey map with handwritten notations along the property line, and a single folded letter on Cutter's personal stationery, not a legal document, just a letter, that had been written 2 years ago and signed with a signature so large it took up a third of the page. She read the contract first, then the letter, then the contract again. By the time she finished, the candle had burned down nearly an inch and the house was fully dark outside the kitchen window. She sat with her hands flat on the table and thought about what she had just read and what it meant, and how a man could be pushed toward losing something for 6 years without ever understanding that the pushing had started before he even knew he was standing at an edge. Cal was up before she was the next morning, which she hadn't expected. She came into the kitchen at first light and found him already at the table with a mug of coffee and the look of a man who hadn't slept well, which told her he'd been thinking about Cutter's notice even without having read the original contract yet. She poured herself coffee and sat across from him without preamble. "Did you read the blue envelope?" she asked. "I looked at it," he said. "Late. My eyes weren't cooperating." He wrapped both hands around his mug. "What did you find?" "The original contract has a renewal clause," she said. Section 7. It says that if the debt is being serviced in good faith, meaning payments made on time, no missed installments, the terms cannot be altered without written agreement from both parties. Cal looked at her. "You've made every payment," she said, "including January, which I have the receipt for, which means Cutter cannot claim default, not legally, and he cannot change the terms without your signature." She paused. "He's been sending you notices that look like legal documents, but they don't account for Section 7. Either his lawyer missed it, or he's counting on me not having a lawyer," Cal said. "Or that," she said. Cal set down his mug. He turned it in a slow circle on the table, the base scraping lightly against the wood. "I've paid him twice already to make trouble go away," he said. "Money I didn't have." "I know. I found those payments in the ledger." She kept her voice level. "Those were your choices, and I'm not here to second-guess them. But I want you to understand that every time you paid him to go away, it told him the same thing. That I'd pay again." "Yes." He was quiet. The kind of quiet that has weight to it. "There's something else in the envelope," she said. "A letter. His letterhead 2 years ago. Written to you, but…" She hesitated because she needed to say this right. "It reads like he assumed you'd already agreed to something you hadn't agreed to. He references a conversation about buying the South pasture outright at a specific price. Did you ever have that conversation?" Cal's jaw tightened. "I told him once, maybe 3 years ago, that if I ever had to sell, I'd talk to him first. That was it. That's not an agreement." "No," she said. "It's not. But he wrote it down as if it was." "Son of a…" He stopped himself. His hand went flat on the table. "He's been building a paper trail." That's what it looks like to me. She folded her hands around her own mug. I'm not a lawyer, Cal. I want to be clear about that. But I know what a ledger looks like when someone's been managing the story, and that letter is managing a story. He looked at the envelope on the table like it had betrayed him by existing. What do we do? She had been thinking about this since the candle burned down the night before. First, you write to Grange and Fulton today and renegotiate the hay contract. That's money you're losing every month that you don't have to lose. Second, you ride to Amos Pruitt and see if he'll take a delivery contract at $6. Third, and this is the harder one, you need to talk to someone in town who knows land law, not Cutter's people, someone who's not tied to him. The county clerk, Cal said. Perkins, he's straight. Then talk to Perkins. Show him Section 7 and show him that letter and let him tell you what you're looking at. She paused. And keep every receipt from here forward, every single one in one place, dated. Cal looked at her for a long moment. You figured all this out last night. I had time, she said. You've been here 10 days. You keep saying that like it changes what I found. Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile, but the muscles around his mouth doing something they weren't used to doing. He looked away before it could become anything definable. I'll write to Grange and Fulton this morning, he said, before the fence work. I'll help you draft it if you want, she said. I can write my own letters, he said with a flash of something that wasn't quite irritation, more like the reflex of a man who'd been independent long enough that offers of help still landed a little wrong, even when he needed them. I know you can, she said, and left it at that. She found the damaged window in the east bedroom that same week. Not the cracked pane she'd already noted in the main room, but a second window in the room at the end of the hall that Cal kept closed and that she had not gone into. She only found it because of the draft. She'd been noticing a cold current in the hallway for several days, too steady to be coming through the walls, and she'd finally followed it to the door at the end of the hall and stood in front of it for a moment. She knocked, which she knew made no sense for a door to an empty room, but she knocked anyway. No one answered, obviously. She opened it. The room was clean. That was the first thing she noticed. Not dusty the way an unused room gets dusty, but actively cleaned, maintained. The bed was made with precision. There were things on the small dresser arranged carefully. A hairbrush, a folded piece of fabric, a small painted tin box. The curtains, white with a tiny blue pattern, were hemmed with close, careful stitches. The window in this room had a crack running from the upper left corner nearly to the center of the pane, and the gap at the corner was where the draft was coming from. She stood in the doorway and looked at the room and understood, without being told, exactly what she was looking at. She backed out and pulled the door closed behind her. She did not go into that room again. But that evening at supper, when Cal came in and sat down and she set a plate of salt pork and potatoes in front of him, she said, "The window at the end of the hall is cracked. There's a draft coming through. I want to replace the pane." Cal stopped with his fork halfway to his mouth. He put it back down. "I can order the glass from the general store," she said, keeping her voice completely even. "It won't be expensive, but if it stays cracked through the winter, it'll be worse." He was quiet for a moment. "That's Eleanor's room," he said. "I know," she said. Another silence. He picked his fork back up. "Order the glass," he said, and he set it to his plate. "All right," she said. They finished supper without talking about it again. That was fine. Not everything needed to be talked about. The glass came in 4 days. She replaced the pane herself, using a technique her father had shown her that involved cutting the old glazing compound away in sections so you didn't crack the surrounding wood. She had to ask Cal to hold the frame steady from outside while she worked from inside, which meant they were working a foot apart on opposite sides of a window and not talking. And somehow, that was easier than a lot of the conversations they'd had so far. "Push the frame slightly left," she said. He pushed it. "Little more." He pushed it. "There." She pressed the new pane in and began running fresh compound around the edge with her thumb. "You can let go now." He stepped back from the window. She could hear him moving around the outside of the house, then his boots on the porch steps, then the back door. By the time he came into the room, she was smoothing the last edge of compound. He looked at the window, at the new pane, at the even bead of compound all the way around. "You've done that before," he said. "A few times," she said. She cleaned her thumb on a rag. "It needs to dry before you open the window. Give it a day." He nodded. He looked at the dresser with the hairbrush and the tin box, then looked away. "I'll leave it closed," he said. She gathered her tools. "The draft should be gone by tonight," she said. He nodded again, and she thought he might say something else, but he didn't. She carried her tools back to the kitchen and washed her hands and started thinking about supper. Dog. The letter from Grange and Fulton arrived 12 days after Cal sent his. It was shorter than Marin had expected and more professional than she'd hoped, which was a bad combination. They acknowledged the contract expiration and expressed their intention to discuss continued service arrangements at the earliest convenience. Language that meant they weren't going to simply agree to the lower rate and were going to make him work for it. Cal handed it to her across the breakfast table without saying anything. She read it and handed it back. "They're stalling," she said. "They need you to need them more than they need your account." "Maybe I do need them," he said. "Pruitt said he could take the contract, but he can't start until next month. There's a gap." "How long can you manage on what's in the barn?" 6, maybe 7 weeks if I'm careful." "Then you have time," she said. "Write back and tell them you're evaluating other suppliers, and we'll be in touch. Don't commit to anything. Let them sit with the possibility that you might actually leave." Cal looked at her. "And if they don't come back with a better number?" "Then you wait for Pruitt," she said. "And you make it 6 weeks instead of 7 if you have to." He chewed on that. She could see him doing the math, the kind of calculation that wasn't about numbers but about pride. How much of it he was willing to set aside to get a better outcome. "I've been buying from Grange and Fulton for 4 years," he said. "I know," she said. "Walter Grange and my father did business." "I know that too," she said. "But Walter Grange's son is the one running it now, and that letter didn't come from anyone doing you any favors." Cal put the letter down. He put both hands flat on the table and looked at them for a moment. "All right," he said. "I'll write back today." "Good," she said, and got up to refill her coffee, because he didn't need her watching his face while he sat with it. It was during the 3rd week that she found the hay. She hadn't intended to do a full barn inventory. She'd gone in to look for a particular gauge of wire she needed for a mending project, and had gotten sidetracked, the way she always got sidetracked in spaces where things had accumulated over time and no one had properly sorted them. She found the wire. She also found, behind a partition wall at the back of the barn that she'd assumed was structural, a second storage area with a door that had been latched from the outside. Inside, 40-something bales of hay, still good, stacked against the back wall. A whole winter's worth, maybe more. She stood in the doorway of that back room for a full minute just looking at it. Then she went to find Cal. He was repairing a section of fence near the eastern field, which meant a 20-minute walk across dry grass in the October wind, but she went anyway. He saw her coming from 50 yards and stopped working, which probably meant he'd already learned that when she came to find him instead of waiting, it was something he needed to know about. "There's a back room in the barn," she said when she reached him. "Behind the partition." He lowered the fence pliers. "What?" "A separate storage space, latched from the outside." She looked at him. "You didn't know it was there." It wasn't a question. His face had already answered it. "My father-in-law built that barn," he said slowly. "Eleanor's father. I helped with part of it, but not all of it. There are 40 bales of hay in there, possibly more. Good hay, protected from moisture." She watched his face go through the calculation she'd already done in her head. "That's your gap," she said. "Between Grange and Fulton and Pruitt starting up. You don't have a shortage. You've been buying hay you didn't need because you didn't know what you already had." Cal set the fence pliers down on top of the fence post very carefully, like he needed to do something with his hands that didn't involve throwing them in the air. 4 years, he said. "That room's been sitting there." "Apparently." He pushed his hat up and rubbed his forehead. "How much have I paid Grange and Fulton over 4 years at $11 a month?" $528, she said, "give or take." He made a sound that wasn't quite a word. "You needed some of that hay," she said. because she wasn't going to let him spiral into something unproductive. The barn supply wouldn't have lasted forever. But the overlap, the months you were buying when you had more than enough on hand, that's real money. It's real money I don't have anymore, he said. No, she agreed. But you have it now in the form of hay you don't have to buy, and you have it in the form of leverage you didn't have this morning. She paused. Write to Grange and Fulton today and tell them you've completed your inventory and won't need to make arrangements until spring. Watch how fast they come back to you. He looked at her for a long moment. The wind moved through the dry grass around them. A hawk turned a slow circle somewhere above the eastern tree line. Why are you doing this? He said. Doing what? This. He gestured vaguely, at the barn, at the direction of the house, at something broader that he apparently didn't have words for. You've been here 3 weeks. You didn't have to go through the ledger. You didn't have to find the contract problem. You didn't have to walk out here in the wind to tell me about hay. She thought about how to answer that. She could give him the practical answer, that his ranch's health was tied to her stability now, that she had a legal arrangement that made his problems partly her problems. That was true. But it wasn't the whole truth. Because it's fixable, she said finally. All of it. The hay, the contracts, the ledger. These aren't disasters. They're just things that got ignored for long enough that they started looking like disasters. She looked at him. I spent 6 months watching things that weren't fixable. The bank wasn't going to give me back my house no matter what I did. I got good at knowing the difference between a situation you can work on and one you can't. She paused. This one you can work on. Cal looked at her. He had that expression again, but the one she'd seen a few times now, where he was recalculating something. You lost a house, he said. And a husband, she said, and most of what went with both. She said it plainly, without performing grief or hiding it either. 3 years ago. He was quiet. I'm sorry, he said, and he meant it. She could hear the difference between that and the reflexive kind. Thank you, she said. It was a long time ago and also not very long ago, if you know what I mean. Yeah, he said. I know exactly what you mean. They stood there for a moment in the wind, two people who had both lost something they'd expected to keep, standing in a field that was slowly becoming a field worth keeping. I'll write the letter tonight, he said. Good, she said. She turned and walked back toward the house. She'd gone maybe 20 yards when he called after her. Marin? She stopped. Thank you, he said, for walking out here. She nodded once and kept walking. Her hands were cold from the wind and her boots were dusty, and she was thinking about the curtains in the front room that needed the rod pockets restitched before the winter draft made them useless. There were always 10 things to do. She found that she didn't mind. The townspeople saw her for the first time properly at the general store on a Thursday, 3.5 weeks in, when she went to settle the account Cal had been running and hadn't looked at in some time. Mrs. Aldridge, who ran the store with her husband, had clearly already heard something, small towns being what they were, and she was watching Marin with the particular attentiveness of a woman who wants information and has decided the best way to get it is to be very helpful. You're the new Mrs. Decker, she said, and there was a slight question in it. I'm the household manager, Marin said, which was what she'd been saying. I'm settling the account. Mrs. Aldridge looked at the account. She looked at it for a moment too long. There's a balance here from last spring, she said, and she said it carefully. Mr. Decker and I had agreed to give him some time. I appreciate that, Marin said. I'd like to pay half of it now and arrange a schedule for the rest. Can you write that down and give me a copy? Mrs. Aldridge blinked. A copy? Yes, for the ranch records. It's just good practice. She paused. Is that all right? Of course, Mrs. Aldridge said, and wrote it down twice and gave Marin one copy without any further questions, though her eyes followed Marin all the way to the door. Outside, waiting with the wagon, was Dob Halsey, one of Cal's 2 ranch hands, a man somewhere between 50 and 60, who had apparently been with the ranch for 9 years and had a talent for fencing and a deep personal discomfort with change of any kind. Dob had been watching Marin with the same expression since her first week. Not hostile, exactly, more like a man watching weather he isn't sure about. "Get everything?" he asked as she climbed up to the wagon seat. "Yes," she said. He flicked the reins. They rode for a while in silence. "You fixed the ledger problem," he said eventually. Not a question. "I found some things in the ledger," she said. "Cal's addressing them." Another silence. "Eleanor kept those books," he said. "First year, anyway. She was good at it." Marin let that settle before she answered. "She kept very clean records," she said. "The notations in the margin were helpful." Dobb glanced at her sideways. Something in him seemed to adjust slightly, like a load redistributing. "She would have liked that you noticed," he said. Marin didn't say anything. Sometimes there was nothing to say that wouldn't make things worse or smaller. They rode the rest of the way back without talking, and when the ranch came into view, the new porch boards visible even from the road, the curtains back in the front window, the garden bed turned over and ready for a spring that was still months away, Dobb slowed the horses just slightly, like he was taking in something he hadn't expected to see. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The letter from Grange and Fulton came back in 8 days. The new rate was $7.50, a reduction of more than 30%, offered without fanfare and without the stalling language of the first letter. Cal read it at the breakfast table. He read it twice. $7.50, he said. "Still higher than Pruitt," she said. "But Pruitt starts next month, so you have options now." "Yeah," he said. He set the letter down. He looked at it. "When I sent that second letter, I didn't actually think they'd come down this far." "They don't want to lose the account," she said. "Accounts like yours are how they make their numbers. They just assumed you didn't know that." He looked at her. "And now Cutter's notice is sitting in the drawer, and Perkins said Section 7 holds." "Perkins said Section 7 holds," she confirmed. She'd gone with Cal to see the county clerk 4 days ago, sat in the chair by the window while the two men talked, and let them work through it, only speaking when Perkins had asked her, specifically, to walk him through the payment record she'd assembled, which she'd done clearly and without editorializing. Perkins had looked at the January receipt and at Cutter's notice and said carefully that in his non-legal opinion, the default claim appeared to have no standing. "Non-legal opinion," Cal had said. "I'm a county clerk," Perkins had said, "but I've read a few contracts in my time. That's my read." "So we're holding," Cal had said, looking at Marin. "We're holding," she had said. Now at the breakfast table, with the Grange and Fulton letter between them, Cal was quiet for a moment. He picked up his coffee. "I paid Cutter off twice," he said. "That's almost $200. "Yes. And if I just had someone look at Section 7, yes," she said again. She wasn't going to walk him through the full accounting of it. He could do that himself, and it wasn't going to be a comfortable walk. He set the coffee down. "All right," he said. "What's next?" She pulled a piece of paper from beside her plate. She'd been up early and had written it out. "The porch is done. The east window is done. I want to talk about the garden. If we get seed in before the hard freeze, there's something to work with by spring. Dobb said the south fence line needs 2 new posts, which is straightforward, and the chair in the sitting room, the one with the curved back." She paused. "What about it?" he said. "One of the back joints is loose. Another month, and the whole back will go. I can fix it if you want, but I need to know you're all right with me touching it." He was very still. "It's Eleanor's chair," she said, not unkindly. "I know what it is," he said. She waited. He took a long time. "Fix it," he said finally. "It's a chair. It should be used." She nodded and made a small mark on her paper. Outside, Dobb was starting up the tractor, and the morning was doing what October mornings did. Cold and clear and merciless in a way that was also, somehow, clean. The ranch was not saved. Not yet, not fully. There were still Cutter's 30 days ticking down somewhere in the background, and the accounts were better but not good, and there was still so much of this land and this life that she didn't fully understand and might not for a long time. But the porch didn't creak. The window didn't draft. The ledger was honest. It was enough to work from. Cutter didn't wait for the 30 days to run out. He came back on the 22nd day, which Marin had half expected. Men like Harlan Cutter didn't operate on the schedules they set for other people. They operated on their own clock, and the point of the deadline was never the deadline itself. It was the pressure that built in the days before it. He wanted Cal anxious and sleepless and ready to take a worse deal just to make the waiting stop. What he hadn't accounted for was that Marin had been using those 22 days too. She was at the kitchen table when she heard the horses. 2 of them this time, not 1, which meant he'd brought someone different from the quiet young man he'd had with him before. She looked out the window without getting up and saw Cutter dismounting, and behind him a man in a town coat who carried a leather satchel, a lawyer or something performing the role of one. Cal was in the barn. She could hear him working, the regular rhythm of something being repaired, metal on metal. She didn't go get him yet. She stayed at the table and looked at what was in front of her. Her own organized papers, the payment ledger she'd reconstructed with Cal over the past 3 weeks, the copy of Section 7 she'd written out by hand for clarity and had Perkins look over, and the letter, Cutter's own letter from 2 years ago that had been sitting in the blue envelope at the back of the desk drawer like a small, quiet bomb, waiting for someone to pick it up. She listened to the boots on the new porch boards. The knock, an actual knock this time, which she noted, and she called out, "It's open!" Cutter came in. The man in the town coat followed him, and he was younger than he'd looked from outside, maybe 35, with the practiced neutrality of someone who had trained himself not to show reactions in professional settings. He took in the kitchen, the organized papers, the 2 coffee cups on the counter, the chair on the near side of the table that had been turned slightly outward, like it had been arranged, and his neutral expression tightened by a fraction. "Mrs. Decker," Cutter said. He'd changed tactics since the last visit. His tone was social now, almost warm, which made it worse. "Is your husband available?" "He'll be in shortly," she said. "Sit down, Mr. Cutter. You too," she said to the man with the satchel. They sat, because it would have been strange not to. "This is Mr. Lyle Fenn," Cutter said, gesturing at the lawyer. "He's handling some legal matters for my interests in the county." "I'm sure he is," Marin said pleasantly. She kept her hands folded on the table and did not offer coffee. "I've been expecting you, though I thought you'd wait until day 30. Cutter looked at her. "I'm here to try to reach an agreement before this becomes a formal legal dispute," he said, "for everyone's benefit." "That's very considerate," she said. "I have some papers I'd like Mr. Fenn to look at while we wait for Cal." She slid 3 sheets across the table. Fenn reached for them with the automatic gesture of a man used to reading documents, and then he actually started reading them, and Marin watched the movement in his throat, a small, controlled swallow, that told her what she needed to know about what he was seeing. "What is that?" Cutter asked. "Section 7 of the original pasture contract," Marin said, "and a copy of the January payment receipt dated the 14th, and your letter to Cal from 2 years ago." She paused. "The one where you describe a verbal agreement to purchase the South pasture, an agreement that Cal doesn't recall making." The room went very quiet. Fenn set the papers down and looked at Cutter with an expression that he probably thought was unreadable. It wasn't. Marin had spent 9 years reading the faces of men who came into her husband's dry goods store intending to negotiate from a position they didn't actually have. The back door opened and Cal came in, pulling off his work gloves. He took one look at the table, at Cutter, at the man with the satchel, at Marin's organized papers, and the tension in his shoulders changed, shifted from the physical tiredness of barn work to something more deliberate. He sat down. He didn't say anything. He looked at Marin. "Mr. Cutter was about to explain the basis for the default claim," she said. Cal looked at Cutter. Cutter's tone had dropped its social warmth. "The claim is based on a pattern of late and irregular payment over... The January payment was made on the 14th, Marin said. The contract requires payment by the 20th. I have the receipt." "There were previous... I have those receipts too," she said. "All of them. Going back to the beginning of the contract." She turned to a second stack of papers. "There are 6 instances in 6 years where payment was made after the 15th but before the 20th. Within contract terms every time." She looked at Fenn rather than Cutter, because Fenn was the one who actually mattered right now. "Is that your understanding of the payment history, mister? Fenn?" Fenn was looking at Cal's payment ledger, the one Marin had spent 3 evenings reconstructing from receipts and bank records and every scrap of paper she could find in the desk and the hall chest and the bottom of the kitchen drawer. It was 12 pages long. It was meticulous. I was provided with a different summary of the payment history, Fenn said carefully. By Mr. Cutter, she said. Yes. And does the summary you were provided match what you're looking at now? The pause was less than 2 seconds, but it was there. I'd need time to compare them properly, Fenn said. Of course, Marin said. Take your time. Cutter put his hand flat on the table. She's not a lawyer, he said to Cal, the social warmth now completely gone, replaced with the thing underneath it that was less pleasant. Your wife is not a lawyer. She's my household manager, Cal said, and she keeps better records than anyone I've ever worked with. He looked at Cutter steadily. You've got a problem with the paperwork she found? I've got a problem with a woman who arrived here a month ago, deciding she understands a 6-year business arrangement. She understands it better than I did, Cal said, which is on me, not her. There was a silence. Outside, the wind moved across the dry fields, and somewhere on the road a wagon passed with that particular sound of iron wheels on packed dirt. Marin reached across the table and turned the letter from 2 years ago to face Cutter directly. I want to talk about this letter, she said. You reference a verbal agreement with Cal to purchase the South Pasture. He says that conversation was a passing comment, not an agreement. I think you know that's true. She waited a beat. I also think you know that this letter, combined with the pressure campaign over the last 3 years, is going to look like a particular pattern to anyone who takes the time to lay it all out. Cutter's jaw was set. What pressure campaign? 2 payments totaling $180 made by Cal to resolve disputes that, according to Section 7, were never valid disputes in the first place. She let that sit. Money he didn't have to pay. Money you collected anyway because he didn't have someone looking at the contract. Ben had gone very still. Where did you get those numbers? Cutter said. His voice was lower now. The room-filling confidence of his first visit was gone. What was under it was harder and colder. Cal's ledger, she said. His records. His money. This is... Cutter stopped. Started again. You're trying to turn a simple property dispute into something it isn't. I'm trying to be accurate, she said. I'm showing you what we can demonstrate on paper, clearly and specifically, and I'm telling you that we would like this resolved without additional unpleasantness. She looked at him. Which means the default notice is withdrawn. The South Pasture stays in Cal's name under the existing contract terms, and these conversations don't continue. Cutter looked at Cal. It was a specific kind of look. The look of a man recalibrating, trying to figure out if Cal had orchestrated this, or if he was as surprised by Marin as Cutter was. Cal's expression gave him nothing, which was, Marin thought, probably the most useful thing Cal had done in the last 10 minutes. I need to speak with Mr. Fenn privately, Cutter said. The porch is solid now, Marin said. You're welcome to use it. They were outside for 11 minutes. Marin counted without meaning to, the way you count when you're making yourself sit still. Cal poured himself a coffee and stood by the window and watched the porch through the glass without saying anything. You all right? She said. Yeah, he said. You? I'm fine, she said, which was mostly true. Her hands were steady, which still surprised her slightly. 6 months ago, sitting across from a man like Cutter, she would have felt the room tilting. She wasn't sure what had changed exactly. Maybe just the work. You got steady by doing things that required steadiness. Your hands learned. Cal turned from the window. You said a pattern. To Fenn. That was deliberate. Yes, she said. You think there are other ranchers. I think there might be, she said. I don't know, but Fenn knows what a pattern means legally, and Cutter knows Fenn knows. Cal was quiet for a moment. You'd been thinking about this for a while. Since I found the letter in the envelope, she said. Week 1. He looked at her. You've been carrying this around for 3 weeks and you didn't... I didn't have enough yet, she said. You need the ledger fully reconstructed before you can show someone a pattern. If I'd come to you with half the picture, it would have just made everyone anxious and we'd have gone into this conversation without enough. He studied her for a long moment. That must have been frustrating, he said. Waiting. A little, she said honestly. You didn't show it. No, she agreed. The door opened and Cutter came back in. Fen was behind him, and the way the younger man's face had rearranged itself told Marin most of what she needed to know before Cutter opened his mouth. We'll withdraw the notice, Cutter said. He didn't sit back down. He said it standing, like he needed to be able to move immediately after. The pasture stays under current contract terms. Thank you, Marin said. This doesn't mean, Cutter started. I'd like it in writing, Cal said. Cutter looked at him. Before you leave, Cal said. Withdrawal notice, signed by you and Mr. Fen. Fen opened his satchel without being told and pulled out a blank form and wrote on it for 2 minutes while the kitchen was silent. He passed it to Cutter. Cutter signed it with the particular violence of a man who considers himself above the thing he's being asked to do. Fen signed below him. He slid the paper across to Cal. Cal passed it to Marin without looking at it. She read it, checked it against the original notice, and nodded. Cutter picked up his hat from the table. He looked at Marin one last time, and the expression was different from any he'd worn before. Not respect exactly. Something more like the recognition you give to a thing that surprised you. A fence you didn't see until you'd already walked into it. You've been here a month, he said. 5 weeks, she said. He put his hat on. He walked out. Fen followed him, pulling the door shut with the care of someone who doesn't want to make any unnecessary sounds. They heard the horses go down the road, and then there was just the wind again and the ticking of the stove. Cal put his coffee mug down and looked at the paper in Marin's hand. She set it on the table, smoothed it flat. It needs to go in the blue envelope, she said, with the rest. He took it. He stood there for a moment. Marin, he said. He stopped. You don't have to say anything, she said. I know I don't, he said. But I've been underestimating you since you got here, and that seems like something I ought to say out loud, at least once. She looked at him. You gave me a contract to sign and a room to sleep in, she said. You hired me based on a circular and a yes and a half. You didn't underestimate me. You just didn't know me yet. He thought about that. Maybe, he said. Go put the paper away, she said. Then come eat. I put beans on an hour ago. He almost laughed. It didn't quite come out all the way, but it was close enough to be unmistakable. The aftermath of Cutter's visit moved through Tanner's Creek the way things moved through small towns, selectively, with embellishments, and faster than anyone expected. By the following Thursday, Mrs. Aldridge at the general store had heard 3 different versions of what had happened at the Decker Ranch, each one more dramatic than the last, and was quietly deciding which version she believed. Marin discovered this when she came in for flour and salt, and Mrs. Aldridge greeted her with an expression that had shifted from watchful assessment to something considerably warmer. I heard Cutter came out to the ranch, she said, which wasn't a question. He did, Marin said. And that you, she paused, appearing to choose between versions. That you handled it. Cal and I handled it together, Marin said. Is the flour in the same place? End of the second shelf, Mrs. Aldridge said, and then, with the directness of a woman who had decided the transaction would include more than flour. You know he's done that to others, the notices, the pressure. Marin stopped. I suspected, she said. The Henrys east of the creek, and old Pete Sable before he sold. He wore them down. She said it quietly, without drama, but with the weight of someone who had watched it happen and not known what to do about it. Pete didn't want to sell. He just ran out of fight. Marin came back to the counter and set her flour down. Is Pete Sable still in the county? She said. His daughter is. Married Rowan Teague. They're on the old Sable homestead, North Road. And the Henrys? Still there. Just diminished. Mrs. Aldridge looked at her steadily. Why? Because the pattern matters, Marin said simply. If it's happened more than once, it's not a dispute. It's a practice, and practices can be demonstrated. Mrs. Aldridge was quiet for a moment. You're talking about going to the circuit court. I'm not talking about anything yet, Marin said. I don't have enough to talk about anything. I'm asking questions. She picked up the flour. What do I owe you for the salt?" She told Cal about the conversation that evening. She told it plainly, without editorializing, the way she always told him things. Laid out the pieces. Let him sit with them. He was quiet for a long time when she finished. He was fixing the chair, the one she'd finally gotten around to. She'd cleaned the loose joint that afternoon, and he was holding the back panel steady while the hide glue set, which required both of them to keep the chair between them and not move for a while. "Pete Sable," he said. "You know him?" "I knew him. He sold and moved in with his daughter 3 years ago. I always thought—" He stopped. "He told me he was too old for it. I took him at his word." Marin kept her hands on the chair arms. The hide glue needed another 4 minutes. "Maybe he was too old," she said, "and maybe Cutter helped him feel that way." Cal let out a slow breath. "If there are others, if Cutter's been running this on multiple properties, then it's not just your problem," she said, "and it's not just your fight." "You're thinking coalition," he said. The word came out like he'd thought of it himself, but was checking it against her. "I'm thinking documentation," she said, "which is different. You build the documentation first, and then you see what you have. You don't go to people with a theory. You go to them with a record." She paused. "If the Henrys have kept their payment records, even some of them, and if Pete Sable's daughter has papers from his time on the land, and if those records show the same pattern we found in yours, then Perkins isn't the right person to talk to anymore," Cal said. "No," she said. "Then you need someone who handles county property law properly." "That's money," he said. "Yes," she said. "It is." The kitchen was quiet. The glue needed 2 more minutes. "I've got $112 in the account that isn't committed to anything," Cal said. "After the Grange and Fulton renegotiation came through and we fixed the duplicate payment error." Marin kept her hands still. "A proper lawyer would want at least 50 up front," she said. "Maybe more. That leaves 60 for operating expenses." "It's tight," she said, "but it's not impossible." "No," he said. "It's not impossible." Another silence. Outside the window, the stars were out in the kind of profusion that happened when the air was dry and cold and completely clear, the sort of sky that made the world feel very large and also, somehow, manageable. "You can let go now," she said. "The joint will hold." Cal released the chair back slowly, watching it. It stayed. He pressed it gently once, testing. It stayed again. "Good joint," he said. "Good glue," she said. "Your father-in-law knew how to build things that lasted." He looked at the chair. Not with the particular careful grief she'd seen cross his face in the first weeks when he looked at Eleanor's things, but with something quieter, something that had a little more room in it. "He did," he said. She carried the chair to its place by the window, where it caught the morning light. She'd put it there deliberately. The light deserved to fall on something that had been worth repairing. The next 2 weeks moved at the particular pace of work that doesn't announce itself. No dramatic turning points, just one thing being resolved and another being identified, and the slow accumulation of order in a place that had been disordered for long enough to forget what order felt like. Dob Halsey replaced the 2 fence posts on the south line and came back with the information, delivered without preamble, that there was a 3rd post about 40 yards further east that was going to need attention before spring. Marin added it to the working list she kept on a piece of paper pinned to the inside of the pantry door, which Dob had started consulting without being invited to, and which she chose not to comment on. Cal wrote to a land attorney in the county seat whose name Perkins had provided, a woman named Cordelia Ward, which had surprised Cal slightly and Marin not at all. He got a letter back in 11 days that was precise and not inexpensive and made clear that documentation was indeed the right starting point and that if the situation was what it appeared to be on paper, there were legal mechanisms that applied. "She wants to see the full ledger," Cal said, reading the letter at the breakfast table. "I'll make a copy," Marin said. "The original stays here." He looked at her. "That'll take you days." "Then I'd better start," she said. She started that afternoon. She worked in the evenings after supper at the kitchen table with a good oil lamp, copying figures in her careful hand. Not rushed, not careless, checking each entry twice before moving to the next. It took her 9 evenings. Cal brought her coffee without being asked, on the fourth evening and every evening after that, and set it at her elbow and went back to his own work or to reading without making it into anything. She appreciated that, the coffee and the not making it into anything. On the fifth evening, he sat across from her with a book, and the lamplight was between them, and neither of them said much, and it was the first time the house had felt inhabited in a particular way. Not just occupied, not just functional, but genuinely lived in. And Marin noticed it, and she thought Cal probably did too, but neither of them said so. Some things were better noticed in silence. Ooh. She found Nell Henry on a Saturday at the church hall in town where a small trading market set up on the last Saturday of each month. Nell was selling preserves, 6 varieties, neatly labeled in a careful hand, and she looked at Marin with the expression of a woman who has heard something and is deciding how much of it to believe. "You're the Decker woman," Nell said. "Marin Voss," she said. "Yes." "My husband Will said cut her back down," Nell said. She had a directness that Marin immediately respected. No preamble, no weather conversation. "He withdrew the default notice," Marin said. "The pasture stays in Cal's name." Nell put down the jar she was holding. "How?" she said. It wasn't quite a question, and it wasn't quite a demand. It was something in between, the sound of someone who had been looking for a door and finally heard someone mention one. "Documentation," Marin said. The original contract had a protection clause Cutter never expected Cal to find, and Cal had kept his payment records, mostly. We reconstructed the rest. She paused. "Has he filed against your land?" Nell's jaw tightened. "Not filed, not yet. He's been doing what he does, meetings, suggestions, notes about easement rights along our East Creek line that will become something more formal if we don't handle them. Do you have your original property documents?" "Will has them. In a box under the bed, which is where they've been since we bought the land, and I don't think he's opened it in 6 years." "Could he open it?" Marin said. Nell looked at her for a long moment. She was maybe 40, with sun-worn skin and the kind of hands that Marin recognized, hands that had done everything, all the time, for years. "I'll tell him to open it," Nell said. "Tonight." "If there are payment receipts in that box," Marin said, "keep all of them. Everyone? Even if they look like nothing. And if there are any letters from Cutter or any of his people, keep those separately and don't let anything happen to them." Nell's eyes narrowed. "You're building something." "I'm trying to," Marin said honestly. "I don't know yet what it adds up to, but I think it might add up to something." Nell picked the jar back up. She looked at it. "He ground Pete Sable down," she said. "Pete never said it directly, but I knew. 6 years of Cutter at the margins of every decision he tried to make, and one day Pete just stopped making decisions." She set the jar down again. "Pete was a stubborn man. That takes something serious to break." "I know," Marin said. "What are you going to do with all of it? The documents? The records?" "There's an attorney in the county seat," Marin said. "Cordelia Ward. She's looking at Cal's situation. If there are others, if the pattern is what I think it is, she needs to know." Nell was very still for a moment. Then she said, "I can talk to Ruth Sable, Pete's daughter." "I'd appreciate that," Marin said. "Don't appreciate it yet," Nell said. "I don't know what she'll say, and I don't know what's in Will's box." She picked up the jar of preserves, the plum one, Marin noticed. "You want to buy something? I can't stand here talking without looking like I'm selling." "I'll take the plum," Marin said, "and the apple butter." 70 cents, Nell said, "and I'll let you know what Will finds in the box." Cal was at the wagon when she came out of the hall. He looked at the 2 jars of preserves and at whatever was on her face that she hadn't quite arranged yet. "What happened in there, sir?" he said. "I talked to Nell Henry," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "And?" "And I think there are documents in a box under their bed," she said. "And I think Cutter has been at their East Creek easement the same way he was at your south pasture." Cal took the preserves and set them in the wagon. "You told her about Ward?" "Yes." He stood by the wagon and looked at the hall and then at the road and then at her. "This is getting bigger," he said. "Yes," she said. "You knew it would." "I thought it might," she said. "I didn't know." He was quiet. The Saturday market noise moved around them. A child shouting something, a horse snorting, the good ordinary noise of people doing ordinary things on a fall Saturday. "Marin," he said, "what happens if Ward takes this and it goes somewhere and Cutter decides the target isn't just the south pasture anymore?" She'd thought about that too. She'd thought about it the way she thought about things she couldn't fully solve yet. At the edges, in the morning before fully waking, in the 10 minutes before sleep. "Then we make sure our records are better than anything he can put in front of a judge," she said. "And we make sure we're not standing alone when we do." He nodded slowly. "That's all we can do," she said. "Be organized, be accurate, be ready." She climbed up to the wagon seat. "Now, let's go home. Dobb said the north pasture gate needs looking at before the week's out, and I want to check the garden before the temperature drops tonight." Cal climbed up beside her. He took the reins. The wagon moved down the road, and behind them the town did what small towns do. Watched, remembered, and began to understand that something was changing at the Decker Ranch in a way that was going to matter beyond the Decker Ranch. The south fence held, the records were in order, and somewhere in a box under Will Henry's bed, documents were waiting to tell a story that Harlan Cutter had been counting on no one ever telling. Will Henry's box contained 11 years of paper. Nell brought it to the ranch on a Tuesday morning, driving herself in a small wagon with the box wrapped in an old flour sack and set carefully between her feet like something that might break. She carried it inside without ceremony and set it on the kitchen table and looked at Marin and said, "Will wanted to come himself, but the east fence came down overnight and he couldn't leave it." "I understand," Marin said. "Sit down. I'll make coffee." Nell sat. She looked at the box. "He hadn't opened it in 4 years. When he did, Saturday night, after I told him what you said, he sat on the floor with those papers for 2 hours. She paused. "He didn't say much when he came to bed, just that he wished he'd looked sooner." Marin set the coffee in front of her and sat across from the box. "Can I?" "That's why I brought it," Nell said. The box was a wooden crate with a fitted lid, the kind sold at dry goods stores for storing seed catalogs or documents. Inside, receipts bundled with twine, contracts folded into thirds, 2 letters from a county assessor, a survey map that had been folded and refolded until the creases were soft as cloth, and at the very bottom, beneath everything else, 3 letters on Cutter's personal stationery. Marin went through the receipts first. 11 years of them, some faded, some water-spotted at the corners, but legible. She sorted them by year on the kitchen table, working methodically, not rushing, the way she'd learned you had to work when the thing you were building needed to stand up to scrutiny. Nell drank her coffee and watched. "You do this like you've done it before," she said. "I've sorted a lot of paper in my life," Marin said. "Will's mother kept records like this," Nell said. "Everything in order, every receipt in its place. I always thought she was excessive about it." She paused. "I stopped thinking that about 3 years ago." "When Cutter started with the easement talk," Marin said. "When Cutter started with the easement talk," Nell confirmed. The 3 letters were what Marin had been hoping to find, and they were worse than she'd expected, which meant they were better than she'd hoped. Worse for Cutter, better for the case she was trying to build. The first letter, from 4 years ago, referenced a prior agreement about the creek easement in the same way Cutter's letter to Cal had referenced a verbal understanding about the south pasture. The language was almost identical. The second letter pushed harder, mentioned payments the Henrys allegedly owed under terms Will. Henry had apparently never agreed to. The third was an implicit threat dressed in courteous language, suggesting that failure to resolve the easement matter would result in Cutter engaging legal representation. Will Henry had written disputed across the top of that third letter in pencil, underlined twice, and then apparently put the box under the bed and not opened it again. Marin set all 3 letters side by side and looked at them. "Same language," she said quietly, to herself more than to Nell, but Nell heard her. "Same as what?" Marin looked up. "As the letter Cutter sent Cal 2 years ago. The one claiming a verbal agreement that Cal never made." She turned the 3 Cutter letters so Nell could see them. "He uses the same phrases. Prior agreement. Resolve the matter. Legal representation." She looked at Nell. "This is not someone improvising. This is someone with a method, Nell looked at the letters. Something crossed her face. Not surprise exactly, but the particular expression of someone who suspected something for a long time and has just been handed proof of it. He did the same thing to Pete Sable, she said. Do you know if Pete's daughter has papers? Ruth said yes. I talked to her Sunday. Nell wrapped her hands around her mug. Her father kept everything. She has 2 crates. Marin sat back in her chair. She thought about Cordelia Ward's letter sitting in the top drawer of the desk. She thought about the $50 she and Cal had agreed to commit to legal counsel. She thought about what $50 could actually accomplish against a man with Cutter's resources. And then she thought about what 3 sets of documents and a demonstrated pattern could do that money alone couldn't. I need to write to the attorney in the county seat, she said. Today. And I think you and Will should come with us when we go. Nell looked at her steadily. You're sure about this? No, Marin said, which was the honest answer. I'm not sure about any of it. I'm sure that what's in this box, added to what we have in Cal's records, looks like something that a competent attorney will recognize. I'm not sure what she can do with it, but I'd rather find out than not. Nell nodded once, slowly. Tell me what to do, she said. I'll do it. Cal came in at noon and found the kitchen table covered in organized paper and both women at it with pencils and notes, and he stood in the doorway for a moment taking in the scene. Nell, he said, good to see you. The east fence come down on your side, too. Just yours, apparently, Nell said. Will's dealing with it. I'll ride over tomorrow and help, he said, without making it into an offer. Just a statement, the way neighbors in this county had always operated, before everything got complicated by men who saw land as leverage. He washed his hands and came to the table and looked at the papers. He didn't touch anything. He'd learned in the past weeks that Marin's organized paper arrangements were not to be disturbed without invitation. 3 letters, Marin said without looking up. Same language as yours, same pattern, and 11 years of payment receipts that show consistent, on-time payment against terms Cutter has been contesting for 4 years. Same Section 7 situation? Different contract, but similar protective language. I need Ward to look at the Henrys' original contract alongside ours. Cal pulled out a chair and sat down. How many letters total now? 4, including yours, from 2 properties. She looked up. Ruth Sable has 2 crates from her father's time. I don't know what's in them yet, but Pete Sable's land bordered Cutter's on the northwest. If the creek easement on the Henry property and the south pasture on your property, and whatever Cutter was pushing on Pete's land are all connected. He was trying to build a continuous block, Cal said. It came out flat, like a stone dropped. The kitchen was quiet. That's what it looks like, Marin said. Nell set her pencil down. Pete's land went for $6,000, she said. Will looked up the deed transfer. Cutter paid $6,000. What's it worth? Cal said. Will thinks 15, maybe 18, Nell said. If someone runs cattle on it properly. Nobody said anything for a moment. He's been doing this for years, Cal said. His voice was level, but something underneath it wasn't. Yes, Marin said. Probably longer than we know. She looked at him steadily. Which is why we need to be careful and accurate and not get ahead of what we can actually prove. We can prove a pattern of similar language across multiple properties. We can prove that at least 2 of those properties, yours and the Henrys, had protective contract clauses that Cutter never disclosed to the owners. We can prove that you paid him twice for disputes that weren't legally valid. She paused. What Ward does with that is up to Ward. Cal looked at the papers. He looked at the letters side by side. I want to ride to Pete's daughter, he said. This week. I thought you might, Marin said. I'll come with you. Ruth Sable Teague lived on the old Sable homestead with her husband, Rowan, a quiet man who ran a small cattle operation and had the look of someone perpetually slightly overwhelmed by the administrative side of farming. He met them at the gate and shook Cal's hand and nodded at Marin with the reserved courtesy of a man who wasn't sure what he was dealing with yet. Ruth was a different matter entirely. She was maybe 30, with her father's quality of stubbornness visible in the set of her jaw, and she'd had both crates on the kitchen table before they finished tying up the horses. Nell told me what you're doing, she said to Marin, without preamble. I want to help. I've been wanting to do something about this since my father signed over the deed and came to live with us and started. Shrinking. She said the word with a particular pain in it. He wasn't a small man. He was never a small man. And in the last year before he sold, he was smaller every month. I'm sorry, Marin said. I want something done about it, Ruth said. Not crying, not asking for comfort, just stating a position with the clarity of someone who had decided something. Then let's see what you have, Marin said. What they had was remarkable. Pete Sable had been, as Nell described, a man who kept everything. The 2 crates contained 12 years of documents, not just payment receipts and contracts, but correspondence with the county assessor, notes from conversations written down on whatever was at hand at the time, a small diary-style record of significant events on the land that included, in one entry from 7 years back, a notation that Cutter had come to the house and made an offer I didn't accept, and he acted as though I had. Marin read that entry twice. Did your father ever tell anyone about this? She said. The offer he didn't accept? Ruth thought. He told my mother. She died 3 years later. After that, no. He wasn't one to complain. This entry, Marin said, turning the diary so Ruth could see it. This is 7 years ago. The deed transfer was 4 years ago. That's 3 years of, what did you call it? Shrinking after this meeting. Ruth looked at the entry. Her jaw tightened. 3 years of Cutter pushing and my father not knowing how to push back. There are 2 letters from Cutter in the second crate, Rowan said from the doorway, where he'd been standing quietly for the past 20 minutes. I found them when I moved the crates. I didn't know they were in there. Marin looked at him. When did you find them? This morning, he said. Before you arrived. He came inside and handed her 2 folded letters, still in their envelopes. Marin opened the first one, read it. It was the same language, the same implication of a prior agreement, the same courteous menace. But this one was dated 3 years earlier than the others, 8 years ago, which meant it was the oldest document in what Marin was now thinking of as the pattern, and the pattern went back further than she'd understood. She looked at Cal across the kitchen table. He was reading over her shoulder, and his expression had gone to that hard stillness she'd learned to recognize. 8 years, he said. At least, she said. They rode back to the ranch in the late afternoon with Marin carrying copies of the most important Sable documents. Ruth had insisted on making copies rather than giving up the originals, which Marin considered sound thinking and said so, and the sky doing the orange and gray thing it did at this time of year when the light ran out early and the temperature dropped fast. Cal was quiet for most of the ride. She let him be quiet. He was the kind of man who needed space to think, and she'd learned that trying to fill that space was one of the things that had made the first few weeks harder than they needed to be. After a while, he said, Ward is going to want to see all of this. Yes, she said, and when Ward sees all of this, Cutter is going to find out that someone is building a case. Yes, she said again, and then he's going to come after the ranch harder than he has before. She had thought about this too. She'd thought about it at the edges, in the specific anxiety-tinged way she thought about things that were real risks and not just possibilities. Maybe, she said, or he's going to realize that the ranch isn't his most urgent problem anymore. Cal turned to look at her. You think he'll back off? I think a man who's been running a quiet operation for 8 years is going to be very concerned about how loud things might get, she said. Men like Cutter don't go to court willingly. They use the threat of court to wear people down. If the threat goes both directions, then the whole game changes, Cal said. That's what I think, she said. I could be wrong. He was quiet again. Then, you haven't been wrong yet. I've been lucky, she said. The documents existed. People kept them. A lot of them didn't have to keep them, and they did anyway. That's luck. That's also Pete Sable being a thorough man, Cal said, and the Henrys being careful with a box under a bed. Yes, she said. Both things. The ranch came into view as they crested the low hill on the north road, and Marin saw it the way she'd started to see it over the past weeks, not as the first impression of a collapsing property, but as something that had structure underneath its neglect, bones that were worth the work of restoration. The new porch boards were visible even in the failing light, pale wood against the weathered gray of the rest of the house. The east window caught the last of the sunset. The garden bed was turned and waiting. "The fence on the east side of the barn needs attention," she said. "Dob mentioned it last week." "I know," Cal said. "I'll get to it Thursday." "I'll help," she said. Not offering, just stating. He looked at her sidelong. A corner of his mouth moved. "You know how to fix fence now?" "No," she said. "But I know how to hand someone tools and hold something steady while they work." "That's useful." "It is," he said. "Actually." Dob was finishing up the evening feeding when they came in. He looked at the copies of documents in Marin's hands and said nothing, but he held the barn door open longer than necessary, which was the closest thing to a question he generally allowed himself. "We went to see Ruth Sable Teague," Cal said. "How's Rowan holding up with the place?" Dob asked. "Decent," Cal said. "He's a worker." Dob nodded. He looked at Marin. "You find what you were looking for?" "More than I expected," she said. He nodded again. He had the quality of a man who considered most statements to be self-explanatory and didn't require elaboration. He went back to the feeding. Marin carried the documents inside and spread them on the kitchen table alongside the others. The kitchen table had become the center of the house's operational life in a way it clearly hadn't been for a long time. It was where accounts were settled and letters were drafted and problems were laid out in paper form and looked at until they became something manageable. Cal had started keeping a coffee mug on his specific side of it. Marin had a pencil she kept behind her ear. These were small things, but small things were how places became themselves. She was still at the table an hour later when Cal brought supper in. He'd started doing this occasionally, without announcement or ceremony, and the first time it happened, she'd been so surprised she'd had trouble knowing what to do with her face, and set a bowl of something that smelled like salt pork and potatoes in front of her. "You cooked," she said. "Dob taught me that recipe 9 years ago," he said, sitting across from her with his own bowl. "I've just been pretending I didn't know it." "Why?" "Because Eleanor liked cooking," he said, "and after she was gone, it felt—" He stopped. Tried again. "It felt wrong to eat the same things. Like I was trying to replace the feeling by repeating the action." Marin looked at her bowl. "Does it feel wrong now?" He thought about that honestly, which she appreciated. "No," he said. "It just feels like food." She ate. It was actually good. Better than she'd expected, which said something about 9 years of practice being wasted on pretending. "The chair's holding," she said. "I noticed," he said. "The joint's fully set. You could put real weight on it now, and it wouldn't shift." "Good," he said. He ate for a while. "I've been thinking," he said, "about the east bedroom." She waited. "Eleanor's been gone 2 years," he said, "and I've kept everything exactly as she had it, down to which way the hairbrush faces on the dresser. I told myself it was out of respect." He paused. "But Dob said something to me, about 3 months before you arrived. He said, 'Cal, you're not preserving her. You're just preserving the feeling of loss.' And I didn't want to hear it at the time." "Do you want to hear it now?" she said. "I think I've been hearing it for a while," he said. "I just hadn't decided what to do with it." Marin set her spoon down. She chose her words carefully because this was the kind of conversation that could go wrong if you were careless. "You don't have to do anything," she said. "Not because of me, not because of Dob, not because of anything. That room and those things are yours to manage when you're ready, and ready doesn't have a schedule." "I know that," he said, "but I think I'm close to ready." He looked at her. "I don't know what that means exactly, but I think I'm getting there." She picked up her spoon. "All right," she said. "Then it'll be there when you get there." They finished supper. She washed up. Cal dried without being asked, which he'd started doing a few weeks back in the same unannounced way he'd started with the coffee and the occasional meal, and they worked in the comfortable near silence that had gradually replaced the charged and careful silence of the first weeks. The letter to Cordelia Ward went out the following morning with a full account of the Sable and Henry documents, a list of the parallel language across all 4 Cutter letters, and a summary of the disputed payments Cal had made. Marin had drafted it 3 times the night before. Cal had read the final version and suggested one change, a sentence about Pete Sable that Marin had written too carefully, too legally, and Cal had said, "Write it like what it actually was. A man got worn down until he sold something he didn't want to sell." And she had rewritten it that way, and it was better. Ward responded in 9 days. The letter was 3 pages, which was longer than her first letter, and denser, and toward the end of the second page there was a sentence that Marin read twice before she let herself react to it. The pattern of conduct you have described, if substantiated by the documentation enclosed, may constitute actionable fraud under territorial property law, and I would advise a formal consultation at the earliest convenience of all affected parties. She read it to Cal at the breakfast table. He was quiet for a long moment. Actionable fraud, he said. That's what she says. She's being careful. May constitute. Yes, Marin said. She's a lawyer. She doesn't say things she can't back up. She folded the letter. But she didn't say unlikely, and she didn't say insufficient evidence. She said may constitute, and she wants a consultation. Cal drank his coffee. He looked at the window, the east window, the one with the new glass she'd put in weeks ago, the one that no longer leaked cold air into the hall. Outside it, the November sky was the particular flat gray that meant change was coming. If this goes to formal legal action, he said, it's going to be expensive, and it's going to be long, and it's not going to be comfortable for anyone involved. Yes, she said, and Cutter is going to make it as hard as he can. Yes, she said again, and you're still... He stopped. He had the look of a man who doesn't know exactly how to ask what he wants to ask. You're still here, he said, doing this. You could have fixed the ledger and fixed the fence and done what the arrangement required and let the rest of it be. Marin looked at him. I could have, she said. That would have been easier. So why didn't you? She thought about Pete Sable, whom she'd never met, and the diary entry. Acted as though I had. And the way Ruth had used the word shrinking. She thought about Nell Henry and the box under the bed and Will sitting on the floor with 11 years of paper, wishing he'd looked sooner. She thought about the woman at the general store who'd said Cutter's name in a warning tone and then gone back to selling thread because what else could she do? Because it was there to do, she said, and I was the one who happened to find it. She met his eyes. That's not noble. It's just practical. If you're standing in front of something that's fixable and you walk away, you don't get to be surprised when it stays broken. He looked at her for a long time. The light came through the east window at that flat November angle, and the kitchen was warm from the stove, and somewhere outside Dobb was starting up the morning work. I want to go to the consultation, he said. All of us. You, me, the Henrys, Ruth, and Rowan, if they'll come. I think they'll come, she said. Can you write to Ward and set a date? I'll do it this morning, she said. He nodded. He pushed back his chair and picked up his hat and got ready to go be a rancher, which was what he did every morning. But he paused at the door. The salt pork last night, he said. She looked at him. What about it? I'm going to keep making it, he said, if that's all right. It's your kitchen, she said. It's your kitchen, too, he said, and he meant it in a way that was plain and unadorned and slightly awkward because he was not a man who said things like that easily. He put his hat on and went out. Marin sat for a moment in the kitchen that was hers, too, apparently, and looked at the letter from Cordelia Ward. Then she got up and got the writing paper and started the letter, because there was work to do, and the morning was already moving. Cordelia Ward's office was on the second floor of a building on the main street of Harlan's Crossing, the county seat, above a surveyor's office and accessible by a staircase that creaked on the 4th and 7th steps. Marin noticed the creaking on the way up and thought about what it would take to fix it, and then told herself to focus. There were 7 of them in the office, Marin and Cal, Will and Nell Henry, Ruth and Rowan Teague, and a man named Silas Pruitt, no relation to the hay supplier, who had driven 2 hours from the eastern side of the county after Nell had mentioned his name to Marin at the Saturday market the week before. Silas was 63, with the compact, careful movements of a man who had worked outside his entire life and had learned not to waste motion. He had a leather satchel on his knee and had not said more than 6 words since arriving. Ward herself was not what Cal had pictured, which he admitted to Marin on the staircase in a low voice. She was maybe 45, slight, with reading glasses she wore pushed up on her forehead until she needed them, and the quality of attention she gave to the documents spread across her desk was the same quality Marin recognized in herself, methodical, unhurried, unwilling to move to a conclusion before the evidence warranted it. She read for 20 minutes while the 7 of them sat. Nobody spoke. Even Rowan, who had a tendency to fill silence with weather observations, said nothing. Ward set the last document down and pushed her glasses back up. 3 properties, she said. 4 if we include Mr. Pruitt's, which I haven't had time to review fully, but what I've seen in the past 10 minutes is consistent. She looked at the room over her glasses. The language across these 4 sets of Cutter correspondence is not just similar. In 2 instances, it's identical, word for word. That's not a coincidence of communication style. That's a template. The room was very quiet. A template he used on people he expected wouldn't compare notes, Cal said. People who didn't know each other well enough, or who were too pressed by their own circumstances to sit down together and lay their papers side by side, Ward said, which is exactly what you've done here. She looked at Marin specifically. Whose idea was this? It developed, Marin said. Ward accepted that without pressing it. The fraudulent default claims. At least 3 of them are demonstrably invalid under the original contract terms. The payment records are clear. The protective clauses exist in 3 out of 4 original contracts. And the fact that Mr. Cutter's letters across multiple properties reference verbal agreements that none of the property owners recall making, that's a pattern of misrepresentation that territorial property law addresses directly. She paused. It doesn't address it quickly, and it doesn't address it cheaply. How long? Will Henry said. It was the first time he'd spoken. If we file and Cutter contests, which he will, 18 months, possibly 2 years. Will absorbed that. Nell put her hand over his on the arm of the chair, not looking at him, just putting her hand there. And the money Pete's daughter didn't get for that land, Silas Pruitt said. He said it quietly, from his chair in the corner, but the room heard it clearly. The difference between what Cutter paid and what it was worth. Is there a path to that? Ward looked at him. Potentially, yes. If we can demonstrate that the sale was coerced through sustained misrepresentation, and I think we can make that argument, there are remedies available. It depends on what the court accepts. She paused. Nothing is certain. I want to be clear about that. What I'm telling you is that you have a case, not a guarantee. Ruth Sable Teague looked at her hands in her lap. Then she looked up. My father sold because he was tired, she said. Because a man came at him from enough angles for long enough that he stopped being able to see any other option. I want that on record somewhere. Not in a court necessarily, just, I want it said out loud. I heard it, Ward said, and it matters to the argument. Tiet. They left the office in the early afternoon, blinking in the flat December light. The horses were at the rail outside the surveyor's office, patient and cold, and nobody said much for a few minutes. Will Henry stood on the boardwalk and looked at the street without seeing it. 2 years, he said. At least, Cal said. He wasn't going to soften it. And money, we don't have easy. No, Cal agreed. Will turned and looked at Marin. He was a big man, wide through the chest, with hands that looked like they should belong to someone larger, if such a person existed. He had the look of someone putting something together in his head that he'd been resisting putting together. You found all this, he said. You came to a stranger's ranch with a sewing kit and $3, and inside of 2 months He stopped. He seemed genuinely at a loss, which was uncomfortable for him. I've been looking at that box under the bed for 4 years, he said. I knew what was in it. I just didn't. You were fighting alone, Marin said. That's different from not knowing. He looked at her. When you're fighting alone, you lose the ability to see what you have, she said, because everything looks smaller when it's just yours against something bigger. You need another set of eyes to see that the pieces add up to something. Will was quiet. Then he said, Thank you. And he said it the way men like Will Henry said things. Once, plainly, meaning all of it. Thank Nell, Marin said. She's the one who brought the box. Nell made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Silas Pruitt shook everyone's hand before he untied his horse with the formality of a man from a generation that marked agreements with handshakes. When he got to Marin, he held her hand for a moment and said, My wife kept our records. She died 8 years ago, and I kept keeping them because she would have wanted me to. I'm glad I did." He said it simply, without drama. Then he got on his horse and rode east. Trusted. Cutter found out within a week. Marin hadn't expected it to stay quiet. Harlan's Crossing was not so much larger than Tanner's Creek that a gathering of 7 people in a land attorney's office would go unnoticed, but the speed of it still surprised her slightly. She was at the kitchen table on a Thursday afternoon, working through the seed order for the spring garden, when she heard a horse come fast up the drive. And when she looked out the window, she recognized the horse before she recognized the rider. It wasn't Cutter. It was Fenn. She got up and opened the door before he knocked. He looked slightly windblown and slightly uncomfortable, which she suspected was his resting state when he was doing something he didn't entirely approve of. He had his leather satchel. "Mr. Fenn," she said, "Cal's in the north field. I can go get him if you need him specifically." "I was actually—" "Mr. Cutter asked me to speak with you," he said. "If you're willing." She considered him. "Come in," she said. He came in. He sat down. He did not put the satchel on the table, which she took as a sign that this was not a documents conversation. "Mr. Cutter is aware that you've engaged Cordelia Ward," he said. "That's not a secret," she said. "He's also aware of the breadth of the documentation you've assembled." "Also not a secret." Ben looked at his satchel strap. He was working out how to say something. He would like to explore the possibility of resolving the existing disputes without formal litigation, he said carefully. "What does that mean specifically?" she said. "It means he's prepared to formally withdraw all outstanding claims against the properties in question, signed documentation filed with the county." He paused. "And he's prepared to discuss compensation for the payments made by the affected parties under disputed terms." Marin was quiet for a moment. She kept her face still because this was the kind of moment where your face could do damage if you let it do what it wanted to do. "Compensation," she said. "What kind of figure is he thinking?" "He hasn't. He wanted to know if there was an interest in having a conversation before numbers were discussed. He wants to know if we'll take a deal before he has to show his hand," she said. Ben's mouth pressed together slightly. "I'm conveying his offer to open a dialogue." "I understand what you're conveying," she said. "I'm naming what it is." She wasn't hostile about it, just clear. "Mr. Fenn, I want to ask you something, and I'd like an honest answer if you're willing to give one." He looked at her. "When we were in this kitchen the first time, and I put those documents on the table, did you know at that point that the default claim was invalid?" He was quiet for a long moment. Long enough that the answer was in the pause before the words. "I had concerns," he said, "about the basis of the claim. But you came anyway." "I had a client," he said, "and clients don't always— it's not a simple—" He stopped. He looked like a man who had been having an argument with himself for some time and had recently started to lose it. "No," he said, "it was not a strong claim. And I should have said so more directly." Marin nodded. "I appreciate you saying that. What should I tell Mr. Cutter?" "Tell him we're interested in resolution," she said, "but that any agreement needs to include the compensation for disputed payments across all 4 properties and a formal acknowledgement of the contract terms that were misrepresented. Not just a withdrawal of claims. A full accounting." She paused. "And tell him Ward will be involved. All of it goes through her." Fenn stood up. He straightened his coat. "I'll tell him," he said. "And Mr. Fenn," she said. He stopped. "Find different clients," she said. Not cruelly, just as a statement of fact, the way she said most things. He looked at her for a moment. Something in his face moved, adjusted. "I'm looking into it," he said quietly, and picked up his satchel and let himself out. The negotiation took 6 weeks. Ward handled it with the brisk efficiency of someone who had been down similar roads and knew exactly where the time wasters were. There were 3 meetings in her office, which Marin attended all of and Cal attended 2 of, and 1 meeting at the county records office that Nell Henry attended with a box of documents that she set on the table with a solidity that, Ward told Marin later, had probably accelerated Cutter's willingness to discuss real numbers by approximately 2 meetings. The final agreement was signed on a Wednesday in February in Ward's office, in the presence of all 4 affected property owners and their representative. Cutter did not attend. He sent Fenn, who signed on his behalf with the expression of a man who had made a decision about something. The terms: full withdrawal of all outstanding claims against all 4 properties, filed with the county clerk. Formal acknowledgement that the protective clauses in the relevant contracts had been in effect and operative throughout the disputed periods. Compensation for the disputed payments, Cal's $180, the Henrys' disputed charges, a figure for Silas Pruitt that Silas had quietly declined to discuss in detail with anyone other than Ward. And for Ruth Sable Teague, whose father's situation was the most complicated and the most painful, a compensatory payment reflecting the difference between what Pete Sable had accepted for his land and a fair market valuation minus legal costs, minus a negotiated reduction that Ward had warned them to expect, and that Ruth had accepted with the tight-jawed composure of someone taking what they could actually get rather than holding out for what they deserved. It was not perfect. It was never going to be perfect. Pete Sable wasn't getting his land back, and 11 years of accumulated pressure didn't come with a repayment schedule. Some things that get taken don't come back, and the people in Ward's office on that February Wednesday all understood that. But Ruth Sable Teague walked out of that office with a signed document and a check that was real money, and she stood on the boardwalk in the February cold, and she said, quietly and to no one in particular, "Dad kept everything. I used to think it was just how he was." She stopped. It was how he was, but it mattered. Nobody said anything. The wind was cold and the street was quiet, and sometimes that's enough. It was March by the time the full weight of winter lifted off the Decker Ranch, and March came in the way March usually did in that country. Not gently, with 2 warm days followed by a hard freeze that killed 3 of the garden seedlings Marin had started early on the kitchen windowsill. She replanted them without ceremony. That was farming. You replanted. The ranch was different in ways that were hard to point to individually but were visible in aggregate, the way a face changes over time. You don't see it day to day, but then you look at a thing from 6 months ago and realize the change was happening all along. The accounts were current, the hay was managed, the south fence line had 3 new posts, the chicken coop had a proper latch, the porch didn't creak. Dobb had stopped looking at Marin like uncertain weather somewhere around December. He'd started consulting the pantry list she kept and adding items to it when things ran low, which was not something he had done voluntarily in his working life before, as far as she could tell. She hadn't remarked on it. You didn't remark on the things that were working. Cal had opened the east bedroom door in January. He hadn't said anything about it beforehand. She just noticed one morning that it was ajar. A few days later, the hairbrush was gone from the dresser. The tin box stayed, which she thought was probably right. The room was still Eleanor's room in the ways that mattered and didn't need to be anything else yet. What it was, increasingly, was a house with people in it. That was a different thing from a house with occupants. She was in the garden on a Saturday morning in late March, on her knees in the dirt, when Cal came around the side of the house and stood watching her for a moment before she heard him. "You're putting those in too close together," he said. "I know what I'm doing," she said. "Those will crowd each other out by June." She sat back on her heels and looked at the row. She looked at the spacing. She looked at the row again. "You might be right," she said, which cost her something, but not much, because she'd gotten more comfortable being wrong in front of him than she'd expected she would. He crouched down beside her, not taking over, just looking. "If you move every other one back 6 inches." "I can see it," she said. "All right." They worked on it together, her moving the seedlings, him holding the ones that needed to be relocated while she dug the new holes, neither of them making more of it than it was. The March sun was thin but real, the kind that felt like a promise rather than a guarantee, and the soil was cold but workable. After a while, Cal said, "Ward sent a note. The county clerk filed the acknowledgement yesterday. Everything's recorded." "Good," she said. "It's done then." "It's done," she agreed. He was quiet, pressing soil around a seedling with his thumb. "Fenn left Cutter's employ," he said. "Heard it from Perkins. He's gone back to his home county." "Good," she said again. "And Cutter himself has been quieter. Perkins says he hasn't filed anything new in 2 months. She looked at the row of seedlings. Quiet isn't the same as gone, she said. No, he agreed, but it's better than loud. She dusted her hands on her knees and sat back again. The garden was going to be good this year, she thought. It had good bones, a proper drainage slope, enough southern exposure, soil that just needed to be worked, like a lot of things on this ranch. Marin, Cal said. She looked at him. He was still crouched by the garden row, turning the trowel in his hand in a way that told her he was working up to something. The 60-day clause, he said. She felt the stillness come into her chest that came when things she hadn't let herself think about directly suddenly required thinking about directly. Yes, she said. It's been almost 5 months. I know what month it is, she said. He set the trowel down. He looked at her. That direct, unhurried way he'd developed somewhere in the past few months, the way of looking that had replaced the earlier assessment and dismiss. The arrangement was practical, he said. I know that. You know that. You came here because you needed somewhere to land and I needed someone to manage a house. He stopped. But I want to ask you something, and I want to ask it plainly without the practical layer on top of it. She waited. Do you want to stay? He said. The garden was quiet. A bird was working somewhere in the tree line at the edge of the north field. The thin March sun came across the turned soil. She had known, in some part of herself that she'd been keeping at a careful distance, that this question was coming. She'd known the way you know weather, not the precise day, but the direction of the wind and the quality of the light, and the way the air felt before the change arrived. She had not let herself prepare an answer because preparing an answer would have meant admitting she was waiting for the question. Not because of the contract, he said. Not because the practical situation works. I mean, do you want to be here? On this ranch, with me? She looked at her hands. They were dirty from the garden, fingers brown with soil, nails that were never going to be the nails of someone who hadn't worked hard, creases at the knuckles from cold weather and rough work. The same hands that had shaken when she arrived at this gate 5 months ago, carrying nothing that mattered except the specific stubbornness that had gotten her this far. They weren't shaking now. Yes, she said. He looked at her. I want to stay, she said. Not because it's practical, although it is. Not because I have nowhere else to go, because that's not quite true anymore. She looked at the garden, at the seedlings they'd just moved together, at the soil they'd worked side by side. Because this is a place I helped build into something. And because you're a person She stopped. Tried again. Because you stopped being a stranger somewhere around the time you picked up a hammer and helped me fix the porch without being asked. And I'm not sure exactly when things changed after that, but they changed. He was quiet for a moment. I'm not easy to live with, he said. I know that. I know it too, she said. Neither am I. You're very certain about things. You're very stubborn about asking for help. I know, he said. I'm working on it. I know you are, she said. He reached over and took her hand, the dirty one, the one with the garden soil in the creases, and held it the way you hold something you're not going to let go of, not dramatically, just with the simple certainty of a decision made. Her hand was steady in his. The spring planting is going to need 2 more people if we're going to do it right, he said. I was thinking of asking Will Henry if he wants to share the work this year. His east field and our north could be coordinated. She understood what he was doing, moving back to the solid ground of practical things, because that was how he was built, and she'd stopped expecting him to be built differently. That's a good idea, she said. Nell mentioned they've been thinking about expanding the garden plot. We could ride over Saturday? Yes, she said. We could. He let go of her hand and picked up the trowel and went back to the seedlings, and she went back to the seedlings, and they finished the row in the thin March sun, and it was not a perfect morning. It was cold, and the soil was hard in places, and she was going to have dirt under her fingernails for the rest of the day. But it was real, which was better. There are people who arrive in places carrying so little that the people already there can't imagine them staying. They look at the worn bag and the few dollars and the too calm face of someone who has already lost everything that can be taken, and they make a calculation about what that person is worth and what they're capable of, and what they'll eventually do when things get difficult. They are almost always wrong. What they don't understand is that a person who has already lost everything has already done the hardest thing. They've already found out what they're made of when the support structures come down. They already know that they can keep their hands steady when the room is tilting. They already know how to fix a latch with a wire and a rock, how to read a contract clause that was meant to be overlooked, how to sit across from a man twice their social standing and not look away. Marin Voss arrived at a ranch with a worn canvas bag and a tin sewing kit and $3.40. She arrived because she needed somewhere to land. She stayed because she found something worth staying for. Not a rescue, not a fairy tale resolution, but a place that needed the specific things she knew how to do, and a man who was capable of learning that needing help was not the same as being weak. The ranch didn't transform overnight. The accounts didn't sort themselves. The legal situation didn't resolve in a single satisfying confrontation. It was months of work, most of it unglamorous, paper and pencil and cold rides and difficult conversations, and the particular exhaustion of building trust with people who had good reasons to be slow about trusting. But the porch held, the hay was accounted for, the contract was protected. The people who had been pressured in silence found out they weren't alone, and that finding out was its own kind of repair. And in a kitchen on a Saturday morning in late March, with garden soil on both their hands and seedlings in a row they'd fixed together, two people who had both learned the hard way that loss doesn't end you. It just shows you what you're left with, decided that what they were left with was worth building on. That's not a small thing. That might, in fact, be the whole thing.